Hello, Bedford. I'm Jerry Hanauer, and I'm your host today for Candidates Corner. And today's guest on Candidates Corner is our current executive counselor and I hope future representative in Congress for District 1, Chris Pappas. Good to see you, Chris.
Great to be with you. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, it's a great privilege, and I also want to thank BCTV. This is a wonderful exercise in democracy that they make possible here. This is the way democracy should be, and informative.
Absolutely.
So, Chris, let's start with you. A little personal information.
Sure.
I know you're a lifelong resident of New Hampshire. So tell me a little bit more about yourself.
Well,
and your family.
Thanks, Jerry, and thanks to BCTV for putting this on. They do a great job of getting the message out and providing a forum for candidates to talk about the issues. And as I campaign for this office, I think that's what people are really looking for this time around. It's not about being angry or just reacting to everything that we read about in the news. It's about a substantive conversation about the issues that matter to people. And so that's what we're trying to create in our own campaign. I'm thrilled to be out there. This is a state that I grew up in, went to public schools in Manchester, run a family restaurant business that's been around for 101 years and run it with my dad and my brother-in-law. We have about 230 employees. And through that experience, you learn early on that it's not about you. It's not about the bottom line necessarily, even in the business world. It's about how you treat those around you, those you work with, and how you're sort of fit into the larger community. And so I think that model of looking out for people, of servant leadership, is something that's desperately needed in Washington right now. I've been honored to serve the past 6 years as a member of the Executive Council representing Bedford and 18 other communities in southern and central New Hampshire. And I think through that experience, I've learned how we can get things done the New Hampshire way. I've worked with governors of both parties, and I focused on issues like making investments in infrastructure, ensuring that we expand access to affordable health care in the state, we protect funding for family planning services at Planned Parenthood and other providers around New Hampshire. We look for ways to invest in renewable energy projects, and we've done it by building bipartisan consensus. And I think that's the model of what we need in Washington, where we can put people before politics. We make sure people are heard. And it would be the honor of a lifetime to go down and try to shake things up in Washington, make sure that we have good representation.
I've followed election results for quite a few years here in Bedford, and election after election, you've been on the ballot. You've been a treasurer, a county treasurer. You've been a two-term, I think, state representative yourself out of Manchester. Mm-hmm. You've served 3 terms now on the Executive Council and leadership. So you are really you don't look old enough to have had this rich experience in elective office, but you do, and your cross-party support is really phenomenal. Like I say, I've followed election results. Mm-hmm. You always draw more votes from Republicans than any other Democratic candidate. Mm-hmm. And I wonder what you attribute that kind of cross-party appeal.
Well, I think people find me approachable. And I think when you're in a position of public trust, you have to listen and represent everyone. It's not just about representing, the base of your own party or the people who may have turned out and voted for you in a particular election. It's about trying to build confidence in our ability to make things happen and get things done. And that involves speaking and listening to everyone. So that's what I try to do. My favorite time as an executive counselor is spent working on constituent matters. We represent about 260,000 constituents in our districts. We do our own casework, and so I'll get calls on a regular basis from local businesses, from towns, from individuals that have an issue before state government and need help, and that's the most rewarding work, when you can actually make something happen and help people navigate the process. That's, I think, where you can still add a lot of value as a member of Congress. When you're that, very attentive district representative, where you're out there constantly looking to listen and learn from people, finding out ways where Washington can help and how you can leverage resources to invest in, initiatives right here in New Hampshire. So that's the type of work that I'll look to do. But, I think, for me, being a local business owner allows me to speak to a lot of folks that maybe Democrats typically can't reach. Most voters in this district are independents. They tend to vote based on the individuals and the issues and not the party affiliation. And so they're really hungry for solutions, for substantive conversation, for action in Washington, where too often it's a zero-sum game. And I think we've got to work to change that.
You know, I think approachable really is the word that describes your kind of persona, and it's not. There's nothing contrived about it. I remember you told me that. I asked you a couple of years ago. I said, "Well, tell me about similarities between the serving on the executive council in government and running a family restaurant." And you said, "Well, it's all about customer service. Either way, it's all about customer service." And
I think the restaurant business prepares you for just about anything you encounter in life, including running for public office and serving in public office, because you have to understand where people are coming from. You have to be willing to listen to people, even when you might not agree with what they're saying, and you have to figure out your place within the larger community. So it's been a thrill to be able to serve New Hampshire citizen-led government. Washington is a different ball of wax, but I think if we can apply the lessons that we know for how we can get things done here in New Hampshire to Washington, even incrementally, I think we can make things better.
Well, I think your service on the Executive Council has not only been amicable, but it's been very effective too. For example, and it's been a split council, as really all 3 terms, I think, either 3-2 one way or the other.
That's right.
So, diplomatic skills were really at the forefront of success on the Executive Council. And you were successful in getting Medicaid expansion. You were successful in women's health issues. And you had influence, I think it was you and Senator Shaheen, even when the Executive Council voted down the contract for Planned Parenthood and family services, that you were able to wrest some funds to continue those all-important health services for women through Planned Parenthood. So,
yeah, I mean, I very much believe that politicians shouldn't be putting up roadblocks for people to access basic care. That was a decision back in 2011 that the all-male Executive Council made to defund Planned Parenthood health centers in our state, which took away funding for cancer screenings, annual exams, wellness visits, contraception, the kind of basic care and services that people in communities, like the Manchester area need to be able to thrive and be economically secure. So I was proud to be able to fight to restore those funds. Of course, we're facing a similar effort at the federal level now where, those on the far right are threatening to take away funding, not just for Planned Parenthood, but other providers under the Title X program. And that would really disrupt our efforts to provide for strong public health, make sure everyone has access to care. With respect to Medicaid expansion, I think that was one seminal way that you can point to where people in New Hampshire came together to make something happen. There's a disagreement about how to do it. People hammered out a bipartisan compromise. It came to a 3-2 vote on the Executive Council about whether or not to implement it. I was proud to be on the winning side of that argument. And since then, it's provided coverage for 53,000 individuals in our state. It's also the best tool we have to fight the opioid crisis because individuals receive substance use disorder treatment services under their health insurance with Medicaid expansion. So it's been very important toward our efforts at growing the networks that are available for people to access those treatment services around the state. So we got to make sure that it's there. And the efforts that we see underway in Congress right now to sabotage the Affordable Care Act, to repeal it outright, would not be very helpful to our efforts in New Hampshire to combat the opioid crisis, to look for ways to make sure that everyone has access to affordable quality health insurance. I think we have to look for ways to expand that, to work in a bipartisan fashion, to bring down costs. I think there's a path forward on how we can do that, but we can't get there if people are just dead set on blowing up the system as it exists today.
Sure. A lot of us in Bedford are very fortunate. We don't have to avail ourselves of Medicaid assistance. We're lucky that we don't have health issues. But one thing that I think people in Bedford really appreciate, 2 years ago when you and I were sitting here and you were running for your 3rd term of executive counselor, you said that you would work hard to get funds for the completion of 101 expansion in Bedford. And sure enough, as you came in town today, I'm sure it's been a temporary disruption, but that's happening. So, I think you're not only idealistic, you're practical in getting things done, and I think that would be a wonderful asset in Congress for us
Yeah,
to
well, that was a critical priority, and it had been deferred and pushed off for a number of years, and it was important that we get the contract approved so that we could start to see some action and some construction going on. Of course, it sort of gets worse before it gets better, and obviously there will be some dislocation, some rerouting of traffic over the next year, but I think the finished product is going to be something that allows traffic to more freely flow through the Bedford corridor, and is also going to allow the town to, have sidewalks and better pedestrian access. And so, as sort of the main street for the town, it's critically important to get it done and get it done right. And I think there's been some great cooperation between the state and the town.
Oh,
on
yeah,
this
no,
one.
I don't hear anyone really grumbling. Sure, we'd rather not be
Yeah.
take an extra cycle at the light in order to get through the construction, but everybody realizes the value of what's going on, and I'm thankful for your part in getting that done.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, it has shown that we do have limited resources around infrastructure projects because, this project probably should have been done 10 years ago. The 93 expansion was talked about in the 80s, and now, it's going to be completed in 2020, but it's cost quite a bit more to get it done over the last few years. So when we defer projects like this, they get more expensive. They cause traffic headaches. It takes time out of your day to sit in traffic and get through some of these bottlenecks. And so I think to make sure our economy is moving forward and ensure that we have a high quality of life here in New Hampshire, infrastructure will be a high priority of mine in Congress.
And important to the economy, and important for practical reasons as well. Recently, there was a debate on NPR.
Yeah.
And your opponent is Eddie Edwards. And it was an amicable debate, but quite stark differences in public policy ideas, I think. So let me talk about a couple of those.
Sure.
On the national level. Programs like Social Security. I don't know if this is an exact quote, but your opponent during the debate spoke against Social Security, or at least against its continuance, and said that we need to wean people off of Social Security. And I thought that was a curious statement for someone like Eddie Edwards, who my guess is he's retired from the State Liquor Commission, and he probably has a public pension. And it's always a curiosity to me that people who are on public pensions would then deny other people or vote to discontinue, these types of benefits for other people. But as far as Social Security is concerned, tell me about your thoughts about continuing it and strengthening it, and what to do in order to maintain its solvency into the future.
Sure. This is a critical program, not just for today's retirees, but for the people that are about to retire and those people that are just starting out their careers and hope to have a secure retirement someday. And, as we've looked at the change in business in this country, there are very few people that have a pension when they retire. And so this program is more important than ever. And we've got to make sure that we oppose efforts to dismantle it, to privatize it, to means test benefits, because that really will undermine our ability to ensure that people have a safe and secure retirement. Social Security has kept tens of millions of people out of poverty. It is important for us to be able to come together in a bipartisan way and strengthen it. Right now, the program is solvent through 2034. So I don't think that we need to take these catastrophic steps that many are talking about, such as raising the retirement age or means testing benefits. I think there are ways that we can get back to basics, ensure that Congress doesn't raid the trust fund, and look at ensuring that people pay their fair share into the system. This is a program that is just critically important for us to make sure that it's there for future generations. And as I talk to voters around New Hampshire, they want someone in Congress representing them who's going to stand up and protect the system, and I'll do that.
I don't think people realize also, not only is it a benefit to individual people, so many millions of people in this country, but it's also of immeasurable benefit to the economy. Well, maybe it's measurable, but to me, if you reduce the taxes of someone who's making $1 million a year, they're not going to go out and buy new TV sets, and they're not going to spend more money at restaurants. It's not going to change their lives and their spending habits or the amount of money that goes into the economy. If you give someone at least a subsistence level living, and support just a minimal lifestyle, these people are going to spend much more money, much more of the money that is given to them on a simple pension into the economy, whether it buy consumer goods or necessities for their family that they couldn't otherwise afford. That helps the economy, to me, much more than cutting taxes for people who have plenty of money in the first place.
I mean, I think I view this program differently than my opponent does. He said he thinks we need to start weaning people off it. I believe that it's an earned benefit. It's earned through years and decades of hard work, and people should know that it's going to be there for them when they need it.
Well, his comment made me wonder whether he realizes that people actually are receiving their own money back, or the money back of their employer, who's also faithfully put into the Social Security Trust Fund for their employees when they draw their pension, with their Social Security benefits. Let's touch again about the Affordable Care Act, which will be more important as a federal matter now that you're hopefully going to Washington. Talk about what's happening to the Affordable Care Act now and what ought to be happening.
Well, here's another stark difference between myself and my opponent, because he believes that we should repeal the Affordable Care Act outright. He said if he was in the legislature at the time Medicaid expansion passed, he would have voted against that bipartisan compromise. So I think that we can move forward in a way that respects patients, keeps important protections on the books, looks to create a space to focus on how we bring down costs. At the end of the day, I believe that health care should not just be something that goes to those who have wealth and privilege. As a business owner, we provide coverage to our workers. We did it before the ACA came along because it's the right thing to do, and I think it's the right thing for us to do as a country to make sure we bring and give everyone the opportunity to have access to quality, affordable health care. That's why Medicaid expansion was so critically important, and we need to look for other ways to give people choice and competition. I support allowing individuals to buy into the Medicare program. It's a popular program that many people near retirement age would like to participate in. I think we also need to have a public option on the exchange, ensuring that there's more choice and competition for those who shop around exchange products. And I think we do have to stop the really political partisan effort to sabotage the Affordable Care Act. The actions of this administration have made health insurance more expensive. They've pulled back on these cost-sharing reductions. They haven't made the investments in reinsurance programs that would help stabilize the marketplace and keep premiums down. I think there's bipartisan consensus in Congress today to pursue those avenues to shore up the marketplace. But we've got to prevent the voices who just want to achieve a political goal and aren't really looking out for patients at preventing them from repealing the ACA outright. I mean, that would be very disastrous. It would take away coverage for tens of millions of Americans, and it would also allow insurance companies to be able to discriminate against people with pre-existing conditions again. It would go back to the days where, we saw bankruptcies as pretty routine for people that were diagnosed with a chronic or serious illness. That shouldn't happen in the United States of America in 2018. So we got to build on what's there that is working, that is important for patients, and focus on costs. Prescription drugs is another area where we should be able to find consensus on how to bring down costs, how to rein in the drug companies that jack up prices to these artificially high levels that just aren't sustainable, for people that rely on these life-saving medications. So we need more oversight. We should allow Medicare to be able to negotiate the cost of drugs that would provide some savings within Medicare. Let's focus on outcomes. Let's focus on what's best for patients, what's best for the entire healthcare system, and not politics.
I know it's almost traditional for opponents like yours to kind of badmouth the idea of any government initiative to improve the lives of people. But more people many more people, by far, people are more satisfied with Medicare than with any private insurance, health insurance system or company. So it's to me, Medicare is a vastly successful program. It's good for the economy. It's good for the health of our nation.
Yeah. And let's not forget the passage of the Affordable Care Act helped realize savings in Medicare over the long term because there was a focus on primary care More people are seeing doctors as opposed to getting their primary care in emergency rooms. So that produces better health outcomes, less chronic disease over time. And if I think we focus on wellness and prevention over a sustained period, we're going to achieve savings over the long term, especially for Medicare.
Mm-hmm. Another area where you disagreed with your opponent was about guns and gun control issues. Mm-hmm. I just think it's quite incredible. The public sentiment is overwhelmingly in favor of some sort of gun controls and some sort of background checks, some sort of waiting periods, perhaps. But I guess it has to do with support or lack of support from the National Rifle Association. But people from the other side are mm-hmm. Just intimidated and won't represent the will of their constituents or the people they're running for in this area. Tell me about your thoughts about gun control, Fifth Amendment rights.
Sure. I think that Congress is out of step with public opinion today. And we see a lack of political courage in Congress to take steps that are common sense, that would very clearly save lives and promote public safety, keep our communities safer. I look at universal background checks as one important step forward that we could take. It's supported by 95% of people here in New Hampshire, gun owners and non-gun owners alike. Yet nothing happens with it because Congress is in the pocket of an industry that just wants to sell more weapons and doesn't want anything to be passed at all. You wouldn't screen half the people that go through an airport. So why wouldn't you do a check on someone who purchases a weapon at a gun show or online? We really need to make the background check system universal. I'm running against someone who believes we should have no federal background checks at all and wants to repeal the Brady law. So that's another stark difference between the two of us. I've met a lot of incredible people on this campaign. There are so many young people that are coming to our events, are getting involved in our campaign, that did walkouts at their high school, that started talking about this issue among their friends, and then wondered, how else can I help to keep this issue out there and make sure that after a tragedy like we saw in Parkland, that this issue doesn't slip from the headlines as it has so many times in the past. And I don't think it has. I think they've changed the discussion around this in a critically important way so that we're talking about it today and that this is a topic that comes up quite a bit on the campaign trail. And I think there are basic steps that are widely supported that allow us to be able to protect the responsible culture of gun ownership that exists in New Hampshire, but also will allow us to take some action at the federal level to keep people safe and try to prevent some of these tragedies from happening in the future.
Mm-hmm. I was talking with actually a representative, running for state representative, mm-hmm. and a physician, and he pointed out that just a 24-hour or 48-hour waiting period, violence in schools aside, would prevent a great many suicides in this country. That just the waiting period of 48 hours mm-hmm. Would prevent a lot of suicides because people would rethink their lives, and there'd be people who could counsel them in the meantime.
Yeah, that is a real statistic, and New Hampshire's a state that has seen an ever-increasing rate of suicide over the last several years to alarming rates, and we've got to do something about it. That is a piece of the puzzle. Certainly investing more in community-based mental health is another thing we need to step up to the plate and fund as a state. It shouldn't take a lawsuit for the state of New Hampshire to do the right thing. That's unfortunately the case around mental health in our state right now, and that has its intersection with addiction and the opioid crisis that we're seeing as well.
Okay, if I'm out of the particular points that I wanted to cover, but if there was something else in particular, before you give your general talk, tell me about an issue that I've overlooked. Otherwise, we can talk about your background, which we kind of skipped over, but let you choose.
Well, let me just say this. I think that the tone in our politics right now is so negative and so divisive, and the president sets that tone. And I think we need someone who's going to be willing to work across the aisle to get things done when it's in the best interest of the district, but who's also going to be willing to stand up to the president and to folks in Congress when they're wrong and when they're off track. I see policies like the family separation policy along our southern border where kids have been put in cages. That should require us to stand up and speak out. When this administration tells certain members of the armed services that they're not welcome to serve this country anymore. That's beyond the bounds of what should be acceptable, and we should stand up and speak out against it. So I think there are a lot of times where our voice is required. And I think if we look for ways to dial things back, to relate to one another, to get back to basics in terms of how we can build trust and how we can build consensus and get things done, that's what people are looking for in this election. So for me, this process is about checks and balances. It's about renewal of the values that we should see on display in Washington, D.C., values of decency and integrity. And I think if we turn out this fall, if we lift up our voices and show what this country is truly all about, I think we're going to be able to make things better and make Washington work for us. This is a system that is slanted, unfortunately, in favor of special interests, of lobbyists, of the big corporations. And I think there have got to be ways that we ensure that working people, middle-class families have a voice in Washington, D.C. So, I'm going to be looking to make sure we can advance an agenda that will invest in New Hampshire and ensure that, our Main Street businesses, our middle-class families have a voice.
I sense this consensus-building ability that you have, your ability to attract people from opposite viewpoints. It's instinctive. It's innate. It's really me. I mean, I'm just in for the ice cream and chicken fingers. But I mean, I really see so many young people who are just flocking to your campaign, and I think it's a wonderful thing, and it's a testament to your.
Yeah, we're very much excited about the enthusiasm we see out there, the interest. There was a record turnout in the state primary on September 11th. Which I think shows that people are paying attention to what's happening in the world around them, and they want to be a part of something positive and constructive. And, as this campaign sort of gets into the home stretch, I feel better today than when I started this process in November of 2017. When Carol Shea Porter made her announcement that she was retiring, I looked at this for a while. Some people told me, don't do it. I think you can make more of a difference at the State House. And I just thought this was a time to serve and to look for ways, even incrementally, to make Washington work better, work more for us. And I feel better about our ability to do that today than I did when I started this out, in part because I've met so many incredible people along the way, and they've, sort of restored my belief that, yeah, we can come together and get some things done. That it's not all doom and gloom. It's not all a race to the bottom or a zero-sum game. That, in politics, you can talk about issues in a constructive way that is going to be meaningful.
Well, as a candidate who believes in constructive issues,
yeah.
And as a candidate who would bring, I'm sure, an instinctive ability to make a more amicable Congress, I think, we've appreciated your running, and appreciate your being on Candidate's Corner this morning.
Thanks very much, Jerry. I appreciate it too.
Okay, so let's remind everybody that they vote at Bedford High School, 7 a.m., 7 p.m. on November 6th, Tuesday. Thanks for watching. Thanks for voting.
Thank you.